Hello everyone, today's video is actually another DIY video, and this is one that I have been trying to sort of get together for a while now. I had some difficulties getting this to work, so I actually don't have footage of everything, and that's because the method that I used to get the wax out of these old candles, I didn't think it was going to work, so I actually didn't film it, but I'm just going to explain it really quickly. So basically this project is upcycling some used old candle jars. If you don't have used candle jars, you can use any glass container or mason jars or whatever you have lying around. But if you want to upcycle something, which I think is the other, good thing about this project, is it lets you reuse something, then I recommend candles. So these are just from Bath and Body Works, and they're just the regular 3-wick candle. So what I did first was I, of course, burned the candle all the way down till I think maybe half an inch of wax was left. So definitely don't burn it all the way down. That's really dangerous. You don't want to try to clean your candles that way. You want to just burn it down till there's no less than half an inch, maybe fourth of an inch of wax left, and then you want to clean it out. Now the method I have seen for cleaning the candles is actually to freeze them overnight and then use a knife to break up the wax. I tried that, it totally did not work, and so I had to sort of think of a different method, hence why this is not filmed. I just sort of went with it. But what I did was to use a candle warmer, and if you don't have a candle warmer, one of those things that just sort of heats up the candle instead of actually lighting the wicks, if you don't have one of those, you can also just boil like a big pot of water and use some type of, if you have a steamer or something, set it over top of the boiling water with that, just something to melt the wax in the candles without lighting the wicks. So what I did was just set the candles on the warmer, and once that wax melted, I dumped it into another old candle, and I just dumped all of my wax into that glass container of that candle, and then I threw it away. So if you don't have anywhere else to put your wax, I recommend just another glass container like that you can throw away. I don't really know any other uses for wax, so that's what I did with mine. But by using the candle warmer, actually it melted the glue under the wicks as well, so that helps you clean out the wicks really easily, so that's why I definitely recommend a candle warmer. So the glue will melt, you can just pull the wicks out once it cools down, or I recommend doing it while it's still warm, just with a napkin. Just pull the wicks out, toss them, and the glue will slide out with a paper towel, and any residue that's left over from the candle or the glue can simply be washed away with dish soap and a sponge or a rag. I recommend using something flat to scrape off the label from the bottom if you're using Bath and Body Works candles. I used just a flat plastic piece that we used to scrape our pizza pan. I used that to scrape off the label, and then I used a Brillo pad with soap to get off the rest of the glue from the sticker. So don't reuse the Brillo pad, just use it for crafts, but don't use it for food, for dishes. But that's a good way to get off any excess glue or stuff left over from the candle. So that gets your candle jar really clean, and the labels on the front actually just peel right off, so they don't really leave any residue, which is nice. So if you have Bath and Body Works candles, I recommend following that process. It's really simple. You just want your candle to be extremely clean and also dry before you start this process. So once you have your clean candles, you're also going to need some sandpaper. I recommend like a medium grit sandpaper, and you're also going to need some spray paint, color of your choice, and you can get some puffy paint or some hot glue instead. It's just kind of up to you. I actually recommend hot glue, and I'll tell you why here in a second. So because this is a K-pop inspired DIY, I printed off some lyrics from a Korean song in the Hangul and just taped it to the inside of my candle jar so that I could trace over it. I also printed off the BTS sort of like a Hanja logo from the Hwayangyeona albums. So that was my theme for this, but you could definitely customize it to any K-pop group or any design that you want. You can also freehand it, but I'm not very good at freehanding, so that's why it's taped to the inside. So the first thing I'm doing is taking the medium grit sandpaper and just roughing up the candle jar on the outside. So basically you want to rub this over any area that you plan to spray paint, because the glass is really slick and the puffy paint or hot glue and also the spray paint will not adhere to the smooth glass. So unless you buy like specific spray paint meant for glass, it's not going to stick. So you want to rough it up and just make a bunch of scuffs on it. They're not really going to show up after you spray paint it, so don't worry about that. So just scruff it up really well. Also, don't forget to scrape the bottom if you plan to spray paint the bottom, which, I mean, you don't absolutely have to, but it just helps the, the color flow. So I did scrape the bottom of mine as well. So now what you want to do is spray paint just a little bit over your candle. So this is just to help the hot glue or the puffy paint adhere to the candle better, just by getting a little bit of paint down for it to stick to. So the scruffing it up will help, but also putting a little bit of paint like this, like I'm doing here in this clip. Now you don't want to spray paint like a full layer of paint, because then you won't be able to see your design on the stencil. You won't be able to trace it. So unless you're freehanding, you're gonna want to make sure that you don't spray it so opaque that you can't see your stencil. And yes, I'm being completely ridiculous here and moving my candle around with a stick because I didn't want to touch the spray paint. So if you don't want to touch the spray paint, just wear some gloves, but it's not going to hurt you. You can easily remove it with rubbing alcohol. Here I'm just doing the same exact thing to my second candle. I'm actually pulling up grass because the grass was starting to stick to my spray paint and make indentations, and so I didn't want that to happen in my final project, so I just started pulling it up. I don't recommend that. If you have some cardboard, just lay that down and be really careful with the dark colors because it'll be extra difficult to see your stencil if you accidentally spray too much spray paint. I think I sprayed a little too much black when I was doing this one, so it was a little bit harder to trace. So just be very careful with the dark colors. So here you can see I'm starting to trace the stencil from the inside with the puffy paint on the outside. Now this is where it can get a little bit difficult depending on what type of design you're trying to do. So I actually had to like wipe the paint off a few times because I was making the paint as thick as the stencil and that just wasn't working. It was all running together. So you have to be really careful because it might run together if your design is too detailed. So I ended up just tracing over the design in the same shape but making the lines a lot thinner. So earlier in the video I mentioned that it's probably a better idea to use hot glue. I did not try this, but I know that people have used hot glue to make it look like things are embossed before, like wine bottles and whatnot. So this is kind of the same project except with candles. So I recommend trying hot glue instead. It's not exactly easy to draw with a hot glue gun, I get that, but it's not really that easy to draw with the puffy paint either. So I recommend just trying the hot glue if you have the ability to do that instead. Also, I think hot glue would dry a lot faster, and so they started to dry. It says puffy paint dries in 4 hours, but I actually had to let it sit for a couple of days until it was totally dry, so it was still kind of like soft to the touch. Like the parts that weren't as thick were completely dry, but the rest of it was a little like squishy, and if you pressed on it, paint would like kind of squirt out. So definitely let it sit for a few days if you're going to use puffy paint. If you're going to use hot glue, it will probably dry faster. So between the first little light coat of spray paint and applying the puffy paint or hot glue, you don't really have to let it dry for that long. You can just leave it for like maybe 30 minutes and then start putting the puffy paint or hot glue on it. You want to let the puffy paint or hot glue set for about 30 minutes or so before you start spray painting, just in case. So I waited for a little bit and then I started to actually coat the candle holders with opaque coats of spray paint. So you can see that's what I'm doing here. I actually did do a couple of coats just depending on if the color was dark enough, like see-through. If it was still see-through, I did another coat. I think all in all I sprayed these about 4 times, but that was because I sprayed the sides twice and then sprayed the bottom once and then went around the sides again as sort of like a touch-up. So it may not be necessary, it just depends on what type of spray paint you're using. But just be very careful, especially if you're spraying in the grass. Make sure the grass is not touching the candle jar or getting up against it, because it will leave marks and it's really hard to fix that. So just spray it very lightly and spray it very evenly, so small, shorter strokes, and not trying to coat the entire thing at once, because that will make it very uneven and you might get a little bit of texture. I did get a little bit of texture on mine in certain places if I was holding the spray paint can too close to the candle, so try to hold it further away, at least 6 inches, and be sure that you of course shake the spray paint before you use it. And then you can, use your fingers to sort of clean it up. That's what I was doing here. I was rubbing out some of the little indentations that the grass had made. So like I mentioned earlier, I actually had to let mine set for longer because the puffy paint was still wet. So I let mine sit for, I think, 2 or 3 days before I started putting these little rocks on the inside, just to make sure everything had a chance to set and the puffy paint had a chance to actually dry. So it did take it a lot longer than I expected, but I do like the result. I think it came out really nice. I'm putting rocks in this one because I'm actually going to use it to hold makeup brushes, but if you want to use it as other type of storage or for pens or pencils or something like that, those are unnecessary. I bought those at a craft store, so if you're interested in using it as a holder for like brushes, I think just sticking some of those in the bottom really helps. Like I said, not necessary, but it does make it look nice. So this is the finished product, and I'm actually like really surprised that this came out the way it did, because I was not expecting it to come out so well. I was expecting a lot of difficulties and a lot of hiccups with it, and I did have quite a few hiccups with this, and it's not perfect. The designs aren't super amazing, like they look handwritten even though I used a stencil, but that's okay. I think it came out really great and I am really pleased with it. I'll probably make a few more of these, and so I hope that this helped, and I hope that you get to try it out for yourself. Thanks for watching.